What's going on, guys? NealGuides here. Welcome back to another video. Now, in this shortish video, I'm going to show you the difference between old gen and new gen, and what's the differences in the tactics, how you can counter the tactics, and what's the main differences between the gameplay that ultimately influence the tactics. Now, let's go over the first most common thing. People think tactics on old gen and new gen are different. Are they? They are basically not. They are almost identical. Everything is the same. Just a few things, and most notably is the things like direct passing, which are more different on new gen, and actually is better on new gen as opposed to old gen. But how the tactics work are exactly the same. Yes, I know. For example, there's some instructions that a player like Martial or Neymar, these are, or even the R9s, the top tier players. Do they have different movement inside the game? In theory, they shouldn't. They should still move the same way, but it's almost minuscule difference. You won't notice that much. I mean, if you do forward runs, for example, if you do it on old gen or you do it on new gen, you won't notice a difference. There is a few things that is to do with direct passing, and the reason why is the way the tactic works. Now, there was recently a patch, and don't forget that live tuning update. What it did is basically the defensive width. So imagine this is your opponent's defense. Imagine here on the bottom right corner, this is your opponent's defense, okay? Now, what they basically did is, now all it is that imagine this was like pre-patch. So if you're now using a drop back tactic or park the bus tactic or everyone will come back in offense, the defense are more tight together. Post-patch or the post-live tuning updates like this. It's like, I'm talking about maybe like 5-10% difference. Yeah, they don't like statistically tell you the difference. Now, tactics itself is one thing, but how the gameplay is completely different. The gameplay is definitely different on both generations. Does that mean you have to change the way you play? No, I play the exact same way on both generations. Is it like, for example, defensively, we know defensive AI is much more powerful on next generation version. And that is why if you copy an old gen tactics and then you put it on new gen, it will be the exact same thing, except for the only difference is the opponent's defense will be a bit more tighter, a bit more overpowered. And that is why you think the tactics are different. So the tactics are the same, apart from a few minor things, but the gameplay itself is different. On new gen, I don't know why, but new gen, the tactics are very slow. As in the gameplay is very slow, should I say? As in, when you get the ball, you might see when you turn, players feel more lethargic. They feel slower on the ball, more sluggish. Whereas old gen is more fluid. That's why a lot of players, including myself, we much prefer old gen because things are much smoother. I think that's to do with the animations inside the game. You might see players moving hands away, sweat away from their forehead, stuff like that. Sometimes when you trigger a player, it should react in time. Sometimes they don't. I just think the gameplay is much more slower, much more sluggish on new gen. And those are the things that ultimately affect the tactics. So if you are playing new gen, you can basically get away with playing a higher depth and you can basically play a higher width and get away with it because on new gen, when you're defending, the defensive AI is much more powerful, and in particular, if we're talking about your defensive players, the way they defend, they got better animations. Even after the live tuning update, I would just say think of it like 10%. Apparently now there's meant to be more space in between the players, so they're not as narrow anymore. They're meant to be wider, but I don't think that's the case. Or it is the case, the difference is insignificant. So what I would say is, in terms of the width and the depth, you can get away with using a higher one on next gen as opposed to old gen. You might want to, for example, reduce your width and depth down, and that is basically it. It's not going to make that much of a difference. The defensive styles are basically the same. I do find constant pressure a bit more effective on new gen, just because the way the gameplay is more sluggish. If you're playing on old gen, it's a bit more easy to left stick and maneuver in old gen as opposed to new gen. So if you're up against constant pressure, you're going to find it more difficult. You're going to feel more choked on the new generation version because of the animations, how sluggish and how slow the gameplay is. I hate the new gen version. I just think it's a joke. It should not have been even released. Build up play, slow build up play, fast build up play, long ball and balance, I think are all exactly the same, identical, both on old gen and new gen. There is basically no difference. Now, the reason, and the same for chance creation apart from direct passing. Now, direct passing works on both generations, but it works more on next generation, not NealGuides, next generation. The reason for this is because when you're on new gen, your defense, remember I said to you they're more overpowered. There's also this auto drop back feature. Now, the auto drop back feature still exists to some extent inside the game. I know there's a live tuning update. In fact, what I'm going to do now in the background, I'm actually going to bring up the live tuning update for you just so you can see exactly what's going on. So a live tuning update, basically it says the following. In fact, let me just show this to you just in case it saves you guys just searching it for yourself. So if you go over here, the live tuning update, you can see over here, increase width of the defensive line in situations where the opposing side's ball carrier is at the edge of the penalty box or even closer to the goal. Set from like a 5-10%. Increase separation between defenders when AI shifts their position to cover potential shooting lane. Again, it's like you can't really notice it that much. Reduce how the AI midfielders can drop back into their own penalty box. Now that's what I said to you when it become more defensive. The way direct passing does is that basically the best way I can explain it is imagine as a defense line, I say midfield line. Players can easily get into this position a bit more with direct passing. You'll notice this more on next generation, and that is why you might find that next generation is more powerful or more effective. I mean, direct passing, should I say, is more effective in the new gen. And that's why I would say, whenever you see my tactics video, I always say use both. Because it depends on your game style. Some of you guys watching this video might come and say, comment down below, oh, there's no difference in direct passing. I don't notice anything. Because you might not go down to the wings and just do a lofted pass or driven pass inside the box. Whereas someone who does that, they're going to say, you know what, there's definitely a difference between direct passing and a non-direct passing, I suppose you can say, between next gen and old gen. So it depends on how you play. And that's why if you watch my tactics video, even from the day the game came out, especially around about December time, I've always said, choose both of them. See which one you prefer. Now, I personally, on both generations, I prefer forward runs. You might not prefer them. And that's what I'd say. The attacking width, you can say in theory is a bit better to be wider on a new gen, but I do find that sometimes counterproductive because the more wide you are, the less players you have inside the box. And let's say you're playing a 4-4-2. Let's say you're like a 4-4-2 over here. I'd rather a 4-4-2 just be a tad bit narrower inside the box as opposed to wider, just because you want to break into the space. So what I do, and that's why I love the pro players you would see, maybe they don't realize it, maybe indirectly rather than directly, is that they reduce their width a bit lower. So you see, and to be honest, it works on both. And that's why in my tactics and instructions, you might have seen a lot of my widths have now decreased, or they're not below, or so they're not really above, 60. They're never really going that. They're always below about 70-ish. And the reason for that is unless it's a 3-5-2, just have a narrow width. There's no need to use a wide width. If you want to play a wide width, right, all you have to do is press up on your D-pad and press right, activate, down the D-pad, and then press right, and all you do is activate, hug the sidelines. That's it. That resolves issues. So if you're like, okay, I don't want to play very, very narrow inside the game, just activate, hug the sidelines, like basically like a light switch. So you can basically play the narrow width the entire game and activate, hug the sidelines to make your team super wide. So that's what I would suggest doing. And players in the box, I would say especially for new gen, you ideally want to keep this on 7. Just because of the way the players make their runs inside the box, as I said, especially on direct passing, your attack is in between your midfield and defensive line is also very, very effective. That's what I'd say in terms of that. So as you can see, it's not really the tactics itself that's affected by old gen and new gen. It's rather the gameplay. And what happens is after each patch, people play differently. You might see people play even more defensively because they read, oh, you know what's going to happen now is, that means now I have to play more defensive. So they see this and they think, you know what, that's my cue to become more defensive. And then they drop it back like this. So people, what they do is they react to the patch, and that's what changes the way the gameplay is, not the other way around, not the patch affecting the tactics like that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that cleared that up a little bit. Thanks for watching. Of course, I'll catch you next time. Peace out, guys.